Meetings and press conferences. From 4 o'clock for 90 minutes, Boris Johnson was before Parliament's liaison committee. We then had a delayed, normal daily Downing Street press conference. In the chair was Matt Hancock, and a very interesting political manoeuvre in the last 45 minutes. For the last 48 hours, the government's message has been, we need to move on. But they found it very difficult to move on, as the press, and indeed many members of the public, are still rowing over Dominic Cummings' trip to the northeast of England. We had expected the NHS test and trace scheme to begin on the 1st of June. But this is what Matt Hancock said 45 minutes ago.
If you get symptoms, isolate immediately and get a test. If you are contacted by NHS Test and Trace instructing you to isolate, you must. It is your civic duty. So you avoid unknowingly spreading the virus and you help to break the chain of transmission. This will be voluntary at first because we trust everyone to do the right thing. But we can quickly make it mandatory if that's what it takes.
And this begins tomorrow. So of the just over 2,000 people that we know tested positive today, from tomorrow there will be a team of NHS tracers who will be getting in touch with those people who tested positive, saying, right, who is it you've spent 15 minutes with that could have spent time within 2 meters of you, and you could then get contacted by the NHS and told, you met your friend Bill, you now have to isolate for the next 2 weeks. And with that, and with quite a big easing of the lockdown coming on Monday, I'm asking you tonight, will you obey the rules? Will you keep social distancing? And will you, if you're rung by the NHS and told to isolate, will you do so? 0345 6060 973. Ben Kentish, LBC's Westminster correspondent. Ben, there's a new name they're all talking about. Boris talked about it a lot, as indeed did Matt Hancock. Tell us who Dido is.
Dido, Nigel, not the 1990 singer, but Dido Harding.
Yeah.
She is the director of NHS Improvements, and she is who Boris Johnson chose to be put in charge and lead the track and trace, or test and trace system, as it's now being called, and pull it all together. That, of course, had to be done in a very short amount of time because it's been a few months. It became clear that was likely to be the best way out of lockdown and the best way to restore some sort of normality. Problem was the UK had neither the testing or sufficient tracing capacity in place. So they've had to get this up very quickly. There's concerns about what that will mean for any potential teething problems, but it is now ready to go. As you heard, 25,000 tracers in place.
That's what we're told.
Dido Harding in place. And Dido Harding is the woman who's been responsible for getting that together.
I suspect we'll see and hear a lot of Dido Harding over the course of the next few months. Ben, was there anything else in particular that came out of the 5 o'clock hall, as it was 5:45 press briefing?
I thought the most interesting thing, Nigel, was the language. There's been a lot of questions in recent days, hasn't there, about trust, about why people saying, should I follow the rules, when I believe, and people do, but majority of the public does believe that Dominic Cummings, Boris Johnson's senior advisor, didn't. I thought it was very interesting the language Hancock used about civic duty, your duty to your community, your duty to your family and your co-workers. It sounded to me like they felt they've got a job on their hands to convince people to do this.
Yes.
Hancock himself said he accepted it was a big ask to ask people who have no symptoms, who feel perfectly healthy, to effectively lock themselves up for 2 weeks because they might have they will have come into contact with a case. This whole system relies on people following the rules, putting faith in each other, putting faith in the government, and the concern will be outside government, but I think also increasingly inside it, that the events of the last few days put that at risk. So no, there was no big announcement as such. We heard from Boris Johnson slightly earlier how the track and trace system would work, but I did think the language, civic duty, Matt Hancock's phrase,
it's our responsibility. Yep. No, I get that, Ben. And of course, if we're not seen to have obeyed, it will become compulsory. Well, earlier on, as I said, Boris Johnson spent 90 minutes before the liaison committee. And one of the interesting questions was asked by Meg Hillier, MP for Hackney South and Shoreditch, and chair of the Public Accounts Committee. She asked Boris this question.
Prime Minister, you said that a number of the allegations that are made about Dominic Cummings were false. You were with him for 6 hours. Did you see the evidence to prove that?
Meg, I don't want to
yes
go
or no,
into,
Prime Minister. It's a simple question. Yes or did you see the evidence?
I don't want to go into much more than I've said.
It's a simple question. Did you see the evidence?
If it pleases you, I will say yes, I did. But I don't want to.
Okay, well, if you say that's fine, Prime Minister, you saw the evidence. Would you agree that it would be a good idea for the Cabinet Secretary to see that, or for it to be published, and then this problem might be off your table?
Well, I think actually that it would not be doing my job if I were now to shuffle this problem into the hands of officials who, believe me, Meg, are, as I think the public would want, working flat out to deal with coronavirus. I think everybody's had I know that there's a great political interest in this. I'm not certain that, and I understand that completely, and I totally understand public indignation. I totally understand that. But I do think that as I understand things, and I've said what I've said about the whole business, I think it would be much better if we could now move on and focus on the next steps.
Well, on feisty form there, Meg Hillier, and she joins us here on LBC. Meg, were you satisfied with the Prime Minister's answer to your questions?
Well, I think that he's seen the evidence, and I mean, this is something that, remember, that Dominic Cummings raised in that extraordinary press conference the other night, said that he had evidence to prove he'd been where he said he'd been. I think, though, that this is going to keep rumbling on until, it's been nailed, and that's part of it. But actually, if that evidence exists, then why not give it to an independent party, or indeed have it published? And then all these allegations that the Prime Minister says, some of which are false, and he's been critical of the media for doing it, could possibly be either put to bed or we'll know the truth. And I think really we've just got to have it out there. They always say, don't they, Nigel, in politics, that if you do something wrong, that's one thing, but it's the cover-up that gets you. And if we still don't really know the truth of what's been going on, I fear. So the Prime Minister said he's seen it. Well, let's just share it. Open government.
No, fair enough. Please tell me just quickly, this test and trace scheme, which is being introduced tomorrow, I mean, this is a really important part, isn't it, of us attempting to get back to some normal life. The government would say, Meg, in good time, all the information about Dominic Cummings will come out. Is now not the time to move on and make test and trace a success?
Well, look, they're not mutually incompatible. Of course, test and trace is important. I'm proud that my borough of Hackney is going to be one of the pilot areas in London to really get this going, because it needs that local input, and it's brilliant that we're getting there. A long way still to go. I think everyone would acknowledge that. But at the heart of number 10, there's this issue that's still there about trust and integrity. And if we don't have that in place, I mean, Nigel, the critical thing in a public health emergency like this is that the government, with this draconian law, which we all agreed we passed, with certain caveats, but we passed it to give this government great power. Trust and integrity have to be at the heart. And if that trust is undermined, that's a very serious issue. And we've all MPs been contacted by so many constituents, very concerned.
How many constituents have contacted you?
Several hundred so far.
Several hundred.
To be honest, I've been rather busy this afternoon and today. I haven't counted them.
Meg, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Meg, she does make the point, and it's an important point, and I want to debate this with you. We are moving on from tomorrow with something that is absolutely fundamental to our well-being and our future. That is the government's test and trace scheme being a success. It needs to be a success. I know there's good reason to be sceptical, given some of the previous rollouts on testing, etc., have been very slow, very late. But this really matters. The question is, are you going to obey the rules? Will you maintain social distancing? And will you, if you get a phone call from the NHS, are you prepared to do your civic duty, as Matt Hancock asks you, and to isolate for 2 weeks? There was one area I thought of real confusion. Robert Peston from ITV asked a question and said that if you're identified as someone who's been with somebody who's just tested positive, and you go, do you go home to your family, let's say, and do they all have to isolate? And the answer was no. You go back to your family, you have to isolate, they don't. And that already has led to a message from Angela, who says on Twitter, let's be clear, if I have to isolate but my partner doesn't, and if I'm infected, then wouldn't the household then have to isolate because my partner may infect people? I suspect, Angela, they've rolled this out a bit earlier than they were going to. They've done it because they're trying to move the political agenda on. I suspect there are going to be all sorts of teething problems, and that may well be one of them.
We will make America great again.